Greetings and welcome to All Strut No Fret one-shots. The reason I'm all dressed up today is that today's play is The Rover by Aphra Behn. So it's our first venture into restoration comedy, so a little bit later than the periods we've been dealing with up till now, and very important for you to remember that these are the plays that appeared after Charles II was restored to the English throne after many years in exile, and that's important for this play because it's set during the time of his exile. It's also set in Naples during Carnival, and I want you to remember both those things because they influence so much about the play. Carnival, because it was a reason that people had to wear masks and be disguised as much as they wanted. And Naples, because it's an English playwright's idea of what people got up to when it was hot. I should also forewarn you that it is unseemly how much I love this play. It just has everything as far as I'm concerned, and you're going to miss all the witty banter between our two feisty hero and heroines because I'm only giving you the plot. So go to the play to get the real joy of it, which is the lines. And naturally, my shot to get me through the shot, because remember the rule is one shot, one take, no cuts, no edits. So I've got a large slug of rum because there is a lot of plot to get through here, so buckle in. Restoration comedy playwrights seem to think that the person with the most convoluted plot wins. So that's what we're dealing with here. I'm going to enjoy this rum, and then I'm going to tell you all about what happens in The Rover. So, The Rover is set in Naples during Carnival, during the period in which Charles II was not on his throne, but rather exiled and bouncing around the Mediterranean with a bunch of men who were technically nobility, but had all their land and possessions taken, so they were posh but poor. And this matters in this scenario because our hero, our anti-hero if you like, the Rover, has the kind of attitude that you only get when you've been spoilt your whole life, regardless of the fact that he is now worth zip. And yet, the play opens not with the boys, but with two beautiful young women who are locals to Naples. They are the flower of the young womanhood, young eligible nobility womanhood in Naples, Helena and Florinda. And Florinda is our good girl romantic heroine, and Helena is our witty wench. And they're complaining about the fact that their brother has decided their fates for them and they don't like them. Their father wants Helena is signed up to become a nun. And this does not suit her one bit, and you'll see why soon. Florinda is expected to marry, but her father wants her to marry an ancient old man because of his incredible old money wealth and ties to the nobility and property. However, we find out when their brother enters and they make their complaint to him, their brother Don Pedro, that Pedro actually has his own plans for Florinda. He wants her to marry Antonio. Now, Antonio is the Viceroy's son. Now, you probably need to understand what the Viceroy is. One thing that can be confusing about looking at The Rover now is we know it's set in Naples, which is Italy, and yet everyone keeps talking as if the place is Spanish. Well, Naples was under Spanish rule at this time, and it was ruled by a Spanish family that had been sent there to be in charge, and the position was known as the Viceroy. So you need to understand that Antonio is top dog in this town. And Florinda says, yes, indeed, I can't complain from any rational point of view about being married to Antonio. He is young, he is handsome, he is honorable, he is brave. I'm just not in love with him, because Florinda is already in love. Florinda is in love with an English man called Belleville, who helped them get away when they were under siege in Pamplona, and that gets mentioned many times because it means that Belleville is already known to both Pedro and Florinda while Helena was locked up in a convent. She hates missing the action. So Pedro leaves, and Helena and Florinda persuade their elderly chaperone to let them disguise themselves in carnival fare and go down and meet their cousin Valeria. So there are actually going to be 3 girls to keep track of in a minute, and all of them will go out together and enjoy carnival on the streets of Naples. Florinda, of course, hopes that she will come across Belleville, and Helena just hopes that she will come across. And then we switch out into the town square and we meet the boys. Now, there are 4 boys for you to keep track of. First, we meet Frederick and Belleville are the 2 posh ones. They have with them a chap called Blunt. Now, Blunt is also an Englishman. He's not quite as upper crust as the other lads, but he is wealthy and he's from Essex, and so they look down on him and they make perpetual jokes about the fact that he's not actually that posh and he's from Essex, but he's the money, which just shows that the English really haven't updated their jokes in 400 years. So they're saying, well, we're just waiting for Wilmore to come along to complete the set, and then we'll go rabble-rousing as we do. And so Wilmore shows up, and he's the one that we call the Rover, and he is the stage theatrical type known as a rake, which means pretty much every aspect of his behaviour is utterly appalling, but he's hella fun to watch. So the boys are all there, and then the girls show up, including, remember, Valeria, the new one. So we've got 3 girls, 3 posh boys, and the girls show up in disguise and go find the men and pretend to read their fortunes. Now, meanwhile, a local woman who makes it her business to dupe men of their money, she is described in the dramatis personae as a jilting wench, good for her, spots Blunt as a mark. Remember, Blunt's the Essex boy. So she goes and chats him up. Meanwhile, Florinda chats up Belleville. Belleville's so down about being parted from Florinda and not seeing her that he doesn't even recognise her because he's just too miserable to notice. But eventually she reveals herself to him in time to set up an assignation whereby he will meet her that night. She will leave the gate of their garden unlocked so he can come and steal her away and they can marry. Meanwhile, Wilmore and Helena, being kindred spirits, have found their way to each other and exchanged a pleasing amount of witty banter to the point where he's like, can't we just head off and shag now? And it's my bedroom, sweet thing, or I'm a dead man. And she says, must we always either be murderers or must we be fornicators or murderers whenever we converse with you men, which again shows that things have not changed over 400 years. So the girls head off and the boys have a chat about the fact that there is news that there is a famous courtesan, so basically a professional mistress, who is newly arrived in town after having been the mistress of a very important Spanish general for many years. He was very old and eventually he died, and now she's shown up looking for new conquests. And so her portrait is going to be put up in the square with the price underneath where you are, if you wish, free to offer 1,000 crowns a month in order to engage her services. So the boys see her picture and, you know, they're terribly impressed with it, but no one's got that kind of dosh here. However, Pedro and Antonio show up separately, and they both see the portrait and they think that it might be worthwhile having a look-see at whether she is worth this kind of money. The portrait does seem to indicate it. So the next thing that happens is Wilmore steals the portrait. The other boys sort of head off and Wilmore steals the portrait. That creates a ruckus, And in the middle of the fight and the trouble, Angelica comes out very grand and very beautiful and says, "What is this nonsense? You're all behaving appallingly. How can you disgrace me like this?" And spots Wilmore and actually whisks her into her rooms in order to chastise him for stealing her portrait. Now that's when the scene changes to in her rooms, where she upbraids him for stealing her portrait, and Wilmore seduces the famous Angelica basically by what these days we call negging her, and much to the appalled onlooking of Angelica's elderly companion, he manages to succeed in his endeavours there. Now, when we switch back outside, the boys are talking about how they're intending to have this plan to steal away Florinda, but the girls turn up and Helena is pretty bothered by the fact Wilmore isn't with them. It's like, oh, she's just made this connection with this man and it looks as if he's already wandered off. The next thing that happens in this scene, though, we get Blunt out of the way. So Lucetta, the jilting wench, has already made contact with Blunt, and he's terribly excited. He thinks he's found a beautiful, wonderful local girl who loves him for himself, and he's hopelessly in love, and the others laugh at him for this. But then Lucetta's servant turns up and says, "Mr. Blunt, my mistress is waiting for you at her house. Can I escort you there?" So Blunt's like, "Later, dudes," and off he goes for that. The girls, meanwhile, they have shown up. Wilmore comes out bragging about how he's now got a leg over Angelica. The girls find their appropriate men and get all flirty, and Angelica shows up, doesn't make herself known, but watches the fact that Wilmore is currently passionately fond to see another woman. So she's already got her doubts about whether the vows of true devotion that she managed to elicit from him are worth anything. Surprise, surprise. So we flip to following Blunt, and it turns out that Lucetta has found a way to trick her marks by inviting them into her bedroom, asking them to disrobe themselves, divest themselves of everything they have of value, and then putting out the lights, and there is a false floor in her bedroom, and it drops Blunt into the sewers below. And so he falls through the floor and comes out in the drains some way outside, not really knowing where he is or where he's been, in nothing but his underclothes, everything gone. So he's not happy, as you might expect. Now then we switch to, it's late at night now, and Florinda is hoping that her lover is going to come and meet her in her garden and whisk her away for them to be married, because remember, Florinda and Belleville, they are the honourable ones. These are the ones who are genuinely in love. Unfortunately for her, a drunken Wilmore, who is not familiar with the plan, stumbles by first, notices the open gate, notices there's a girl behind the open gate because the guy has a nose for a girl, and assumes that because she's there in the garden, in her own garden, and the gate is unlocked, that anyone who comes by is welcome to it. And so he assaults her, and it's pretty gross. And therefore she is forced to put up a racket, and by the time Belleville arrives, her brother has also been roused and the plan is kaput. So she gets out of it without actual damage, but neither does she get to run away with her lover. Now we switch to the town square again, and Belleville is furious with Wilmore. He is so over his drunken, lustful antics, getting them into scrapes everywhere they go, and they get into a furious fight, which Frederick is there to try and calm down. You see, this is why we have 3 boys and 3 girls, because you always need conflict between the two and someone to facilitate an out. This is outside Angelica's house, and this actually matters because while the boys are fighting, Antonio has decided, Antonio the Viceroy's son, remember, top dog, he has decided that it is worth his while to pay the 1,000 crowns and engage the services of Angelica. So he arrives with a servant carrying the money, and Pedro, who had similar kind of thoughts, arrives, sees him, recognizes him, and thinks his sister is being profoundly insulted by the fact that the man whose marriage he has arranged with his sister is currently courting a famous courtesan. So they get in scrap, and there's a fight. Wilmore gets involved in the fight, and he's the one who actually injures Antonio's sword arm with a blow, but then runs away. Belleville is the one who turns up, tries to offer assistance to Antonio, but he's the one who gets caught. Oh no, I missed an important point, which is that when Pedro confronts Antonio, Pedro knows who Antonio is. Antonio doesn't know who Pedro is because, disguises. And they challenge each other. And they say, tomorrow we will meet on the Molo, which is like the port, the pier. And it's obviously where people go to have duels all the time in this town. And they agree to this challenge. They agree to fight masked so that they can't be known and arrested for this unlawful behaviour. So their fight's going to happen on the next day. So at the moment, Belleville is the one who's been taken by Antonio's men, and he thinks he is screwed now. I mean, he is royally rogered because he has been captured by not only his rival in love and marriage, but the most important young man in the city. So he really thinks he's just going to be disappeared and dumped off the edge of the Molo. But there's a scene where Antonio comes in to talk to him, and it turns out that no, and what Antonio wants from him is because Antonio has this injury in his arm, he can no longer fence. So what he asks Belleville to do is to disguise himself as Antonio and meet his rival, who he doesn't know who it is, the next day for their duel on the pier. And so Belleville's terribly impressed with the nobility of Antonio in this being what he's looking for, and a little bit bummed that the guy who is his rival is actually an awfully decent chap and seems to be very gallant and brave and dashing and all that stuff. But he agrees to do it because, honour and that kind of thing. So we jump forward till the next day and we meet for the duel. So Antonio's not there. Pedro shows up masked. Belleville shows up dressed in Antonio's clothes. Florinda shows up, recognizes her brother, thinks she's relieved that it's not Belleville that her brother is fighting because she doesn't recognize him she sees he's in Antonio's clothes. But they have a duel. Belleville disarms Pedro, and therefore Florinda inserts herself into the duel to protect her brother. She says, please don't harm my brother. If the name Florinda means anything to you, and of course Belleville's like, oh, well, what can I do? Unfortunately for them, Wilmore rocks up again. This is the guy who ruins everything, remember? And he immediately recognizes recognizes Belleville and says, oh, sorry, Belleville, good to see you here. What are you doing having a duel on the Molo? And Pedro, realizing that he's fighting Belleville, not Antonio, is pretty upset with everyone. So really they just sort of run off at this point. And we really get a second round of quarrels because Belleville's cross with Wilmore for ruining things again, and then Angelica shows up and she's cross with Wilmore for chatting up another girl after he's professed devotion to her, and Wilmore's like, well, what did you expect? Look how handsome I am. And it gives the girls a chance to regroup, redisguise themselves, and Florinda's like, I'm just going to have to get out of here, run away, go find Belleville myself, and off we'll go and marry. It's all I can do. Unfortunately for her, there's a lot of trouble with rambling free on the streets of Naples, even if you're a very clever and very well-connected young woman, particularly when you're in disguise. So she finds herself on the street being seen by Pedro, and in order to get away from him, she dashes into the nearest house. Now that is, in this case, it turns out to be the house that Blunt is in, hiding away since he realizes he's been tricked and he has nothing to wear outside on the street. So she stumbles into the house with only Blunt in his underwear, and you get a really disturbing scene, and points to Aphra Behn for not shying away from this. She's completely willing to go there and show how awful it can be in the way that men are willing to treat women they perceive as vulnerable. Blunt more or less says, I've been jilted by a girl and lost everything, and therefore all women owe me, and therefore you are mine. And he prepares to rape Florinda, not knowing who she is. She's masking again. And then just in time, Frederick turns up, but this isn't necessarily a good thing. Frederick turns up and Blunt just explains the situation and says more or less, well, we can both have a go at her. And Florinda makes a really impassioned pleas for the fact that she's actually a nice girl, and they shouldn't be doing this to her. And Frederick has this appalling line where he says, what if she's telling the truth? It would anger us vilely to be trussed up for rape on a maid of quality when we only think we ruffle a harlot. Because, of course, it only matters if you do awful things to women who are important. So that's all a bit ick. But the next thing that happens is Pedro and Belleville have actually got very chummy since the duel, especially since Pedro is deeply pissed with Antonio for paying his attentions to Angelica. So they haven't quite got to the point where he's happy for Pedro to marry his sister, but they are behaving like comrades, as they would have been back in the siege of Pamplona. So they come back to the house. So you see everyone's coming back to the same house. That makes perfect sense. And Florinda's like locked in the back room, hearing all these men turn up, including her lover and her brother, and she can't reveal herself. Now this is where, and they all honestly stand around chatting about who wants to have first go at her. I will need to send someone in to talk to her about who she'd like to do first. It's that gross. Luckily, Valeria, who I know we haven't seen much of so far, has her head well screwed on, and she comes in and accosts Pedro and says, oh, my cousin, your sister has run away. I think she's looking for Belleville. She's out there on the streets of Naples, and who knows where she is. You must go look for her. And she manages to get Pedro out of the way, so that means Florinda is able to come out to reveal herself. The boys all feel terrible. They apologize. She accepts their apology, and they send out for a parson to very quickly get Belleville married to Florinda before anything else happens. So Wilmore is put on guard on the door. So while the others are off getting Florinda and Belleville married, Wilmore's the only one there. Angelica shows up, masked and with a pistol. I told you this play's got everything. And she is absolutely blind furious with him and says she's going to kill him. And she says, well, what would you say if I said I was going to shoot you right now? And he says, well, I would say there's the end of a proper handsome fellow who might have done good service yet. Because he just cannot be serious. And the next person to show up is actually Antonio, because he saw Angelica's carriage outside. So he comes in and he's terribly dashing and proper, and sees the gun in Angelica's hand and takes it from her and says, let me disarm you of this unbecoming instrument of death. And who are you, sir, to warrant who was so unhappy as to warrant such behaviour from her. Anyway, when she's faced with a guy who actually would seriously kill Wilmore on her behalf, Angelica, softens or decides he's not worth it, and says, no, it's fine, let him live. And Antonio takes Angelica away. And I really like this, because I like the fact that the woman with a past, instead of being punished by the narrative here, because I honestly don't think it's a punishment not to end up with Wilmore, is escorted very nobly out by the man who's the most important dashing young gallant in the whole town. So that's actually a pleasing twist for me. So we've still got Helena missing. Everyone else is around. Helena shows up in her disguise as a boy, and I think I missed a whole phase earlier where Helena shows up disguised as a boy, basically just in order to find out what's going on between Wilmore and Angelica, and just succeeds in getting them really cross with each other. And it's, it's cute, it's fun, but doesn't really progress the plot very much. So Helen shows up, she gets up to speed with what's going on, and she and Wilmore have a lengthy chat about whether it's worth getting married in order to be able to shag, because they really would like to, if you don't mind, thank you very much. So they agree to do that. Then everyone comes out from Florinda and Belleville's wedding, and they sort of say, well, yeah, we might do that too if it means you get sex at the end. I mean, who wouldn't? Then Pedro finds his way back saying, haven't found Florinda. And they're like, well, here she is, and they're married. And he's like, well, fine. It's just fine. I'm cross with Antonio anyway. I think Belleville's a decent and honourable man who saved our lives at the siege of Pamplona. You do you. And he more or less washes his hands of Helena as well and says, look, you're on your own head be it. I give up. And so everyone decides to marry. And then word comes in, and Blunt comes in having been dressed in new robes that he's bought from a local tailor, which means he's dressed in the Spanish style, and everyone thinks this is just the funniest thing because an Essex calf is dressed as a flamboyant Spanish gentleman. Hilarious. But the important thing is that our rake and our witty wench have managed to find their way to each other, and before the evening is out, they will indeed get to do all the things they've been wanting to do from the first scene. And then the maskers of Carnival appear at the door, and there is much riotous rejoicing from everyone. I got there. Apologies for the long. It's not my fault. There is so much plot, but there is also so much wit and charm and sword fighting and drama and beautiful characters with beautiful lines, which I haven't done justice to at all. So if you are thinking about the Rover, go read the play. Go find someone to perform some lines with and enjoy the joyousness of putting people on stage who can match each other with their wits, because that's what Restoration comedy is all about.